You think you truly know your family? I used to believe that lie until the night my mother changed the locks to my workshop and sent me a text with just 3 words wishing me luck. She thought she had finally destroyed me, but instead, she handed me the weapon. 2 days later, everything they owned, from their land and reputation to their marriage, belonged to me. My name is Harper Lopez. I am 32 years old, and up until 20 minutes ago, I was the unseen spine of the finest woodworking shop in Silverford, Illinois. Now, I am just a woman sitting in a dark apartment with a vibrating phone and a severed connection to the only life I have ever known. The silence in my living room was absolute. It was a small space, a studio apartment that smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee, located above a bakery on 4th Street. It was not the kind of place where dynastic wars began, but tonight, the air felt heavy with the static of an impending storm. My phone sat on the thrifted oak coffee table, the screen illuminating the ceiling with a harsh, artificial white light. It buzzed once, a short, angry sound that cut through the quiet. I did not reach for it immediately. There is an instinct you develop when you grow up in a house built on eggshells and passive aggression. You learn to sense the temperature of a room before you enter it, and you learn to fear the sudden notifications that come after the sun goes down. My stomach tightened, a cold knot forming just beneath my ribs. I knew who it was before I even looked. Caroline Mercer. She is my mother, though I have not called her that in the privacy of my own mind for a very long time. On the screen, the preview of the message was short. It was brutal in its efficiency. There were no pleasantries, no softening of the blow, just the raw data of betrayal delivered via a cellular network. I picked up the device. The metal case felt freezing against my palm. I unlocked the screen and read the full message, my eyes tracing the shapes of the letters as if they were written in a foreign language. We changed the locks at the shop this evening. Do not bother coming in tomorrow. You are no longer authorized on the premises. Let us see if you can survive this. Good luck. I read it once, then I read it again. My breath hitched, but it did not break. I waited for the tears. I waited for the familiar hot sting of humiliation that usually accompanied Caroline's cruelty. When I was a child, her words would reduce me to a sobbing mess, desperate for her approval, desperate to be folded back into the warmth of the family. I waited for the panic to set in, for the terrifying realization that my income, my routine, and my passion had been severed with the click of a deadbolt. But the tears did not come. Instead, a strange, creeping numbness washed over me. It started at my fingertips and worked its way up my arms, settling into my chest like a block of ice. It was not the absence of feeling. It was the total suspension of it. It was the physiological response to a catastrophic injury, the moment of shock before the pain registers. I stood up and walked to the window. The streetlights of Silverford were flickering on, casting long amber shadows across the pavement. Down the road, about 2 miles away, sat the workshop. I could see it in my mind's eye as clearly as if I were standing in the center of the floor. I knew the smell of that place better than I knew the scent of my own skin. It smelled of sawdust and varnish, of sharp steel and ancient timber. I knew exactly where I had left my apron, hanging on the hook by the CNC machine. I knew that the joinery on the custom walnut dining table for the Miller estate was only halfway done, waiting for my hand to finish the dovetails. They had changed the locks. The physical reality of it hit me then. I imagined Graham, my stepfather, standing at the heavy steel door of the warehouse. He would have hired a locksmith, probably the cheap one from over in the next county because Graham never paid for quality if he could avoid it. I could picture the smug satisfaction on his face as he watched the new tumblers slide into place. He would be wiping his hands on his jeans, feeling like a king who had finally secured his castle against the invader. And Trevor, my half-brother, he was likely there too, leaning against his brand-new truck, the one the company accounts paid for, scrolling through his phone and laughing. They would be celebrating right now. That was the part that made the cold inside me deepen into something solid and heavy. They were not mourning the loss of a daughter or a sister. They were not worried about how the production schedule would be met without me. They were relieving themselves of a burden. To them, I was not the artisan who designed the furniture that put our name on the map. I was not the operational manager who balanced the books and sourced the lumber. I was simply the obstacle. I was the annoying voice of reason, the reminder of work ethic in a house that preferred shortcuts, the stepchild who worked too hard and made them feel inadequate just by existing. Let us see if you can survive this. The sentence echoed in the empty apartment. It was a taunt. It was a challenge thrown down from the high walls of their delusion. Caroline believed that without the workshop, without the Mercer family name, I was nothing. She thought she was cutting off my oxygen supply. She imagined me here, in this apartment, hyperventilating, terrified of the future, perhaps reaching for the phone to call her and beg. She wanted the apology. She wanted me to crawl back and ask what I needed to do to earn my way back inside. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. My face was pale, my dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, my eyes wide and dark, but there was no fear in them. That was the surprise. The fear was gone. For 32 years. I had lived in fear of this exact moment. I had worked 80-hour weeks, destroyed my back lifting heavy slabs of oak, and sacrificed my social life to keep that business afloat. All because I was terrified they would cast me out. I had bought my place in the family with sweat and blood. I had thought that if I just made myself indispensable enough, if I just made enough money for them, they would eventually have to love me. Or if not love me, at least respect me. Tonight, they proved that calculation wrong. You cannot buy loyalty from people who do not understand the currency of gratitude. I turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. My hand was steady, rock steady. I drank the water slowly, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat. My mind began to race, not with panic, but with a sudden, crystal-clear precision. It was as if a fog had lifted. They thought the workshop was the source of the power. They thought the machines, the inventory, the building itself constituted the business. Graham saw a building full of tools and thought that owning the keys made him the master of the craft. Caroline saw the bank account and thought that controlling the access meant she controlled the wealth. They were so fundamentally, arrogantly wrong. I was the business. I sat down at my small desk in the corner of the room. It was a simple IKEA desk, nothing like the sprawling mahogany workbench I had built for myself at the shop, but it would do. I reached out and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, the familiar desktop background of a forest in winter greeting me. I stared at the cursor blinking on the screen. The text message was still open on my phone, sitting beside the computer. "Good luck," she had written. A dark, humorless smile touched the corner of my lips. It was the first expression I had made since reading the message. It felt foreign on my face. They were celebrating a victory that existed only in their heads. They were probably opening a bottle of wine, toasting to the fact that Harper was finally gone, that they could finally run the business the way they wanted without my nagging about margins, or quality control, or ethical sourcing. They were likely dreaming of the money they would save by not paying me, forgetting entirely that I was the one who brought the money in. I typed in my password and logged into the cloud server. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I could feel the adrenaline shifting. It was no longer the adrenaline of flight. It was the adrenaline of the hunt. The chasm between us was vast. They viewed family as a hierarchy of control, where affection was a reward for obedience. I had spent my entire adult life trying to navigate that maze, trying to find the cheese at the end that would make me feel like a daughter. But the maze was a lie. There was no cheese. There was only the trap. And tonight, by changing the locks, they had inadvertently opened the cage. I clicked on the folder labeled Mercer Operations. Everything was there. The supply chains, the client lists, the vendor contracts, the proprietary designs, the architectural blueprints for the upcoming autumn collection. They had the physical keys to the building. That was true. They could walk in and touch the saws and the drills. They could stand in the office and look at the awards on the wall. But I had the keys to the engine. I looked at the time. It was 8:15 in the evening. The courts were closed. The banks were closed. The suppliers were at home having dinner with their families. The world was asleep, and my family was drunk on their own hubris. They had given me a 12-hour head start. I did not feel like a victim anymore. The sense of trauma, the feeling of being an orphaned child rejected by her mother, was still there, sitting heavy in my gut, but it had been encased in a layer of steel. I pushed the hurt down, deep into the basement of my psyche where I kept all the other injuries Caroline had inflicted on me over the years. I would unpack that later. I would grieve the mother I never had on my own time. Right now, I had work to do. I opened a new document. I did not title it Revenge. That was too emotional, too messy. I titled it Dissolution. My eyes scanned the screen, my brain organizing the chaos into a linear path of destruction. I thought about the contracts I had personally negotiated. I thought about the suppliers who only picked up the phone because they liked me, who tolerated Graham only because I vouched for him. I thought about the passwords to the design software that only I knew. "See if you can survive this," I whispered to the empty room, repeating her words. The irony was suffocating. They thought they were testing my survival skills. They did not realize they were testing their own. They had pulled the pin on a grenade and then handed it to me, assuming I would be the one to explode. They forgot that I was the one who knew how to put the pin back in, or better yet, where to throw it so it caused the maximum amount of structural damage. I cracked my knuckles. The sound was loud in the silence. I was Harper Lopez. I was a master craftsman. I knew how to build things from nothing. I knew how to take a rough, ugly piece of timber and plane it down until it was smooth and beautiful. And conversely, I knew exactly where the weak points in a structure were. I knew that if you pulled the right pin, or removed the right load-bearing beam, the entire house would come crashing down. They wanted to play a game of lockout fine. I navigated to the vendor portal. My profile was still active. Of course it was. They had changed the physical locks, but they didn't know enough about the back end of the business to change the digital ones. They were analog thinkers in a digital world. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lemon polish and the stale air of my freedom. The coldness inside me solidified into a weapon. I was not going to scream. I was not going to drive over there and bang on the doors. I was not going to send a long, emotional text message asking why I was going to dismantle their world, piece by piece, with the same precision I used to build their fortune. The cursor blinked. I began to type. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the room, casting long, distorted shadows against the bare walls of my apartment. Outside, the city of Silverford was winding down, but inside my digital command center, I was just beginning to wake up. I navigated to the bookmark bar on my browser, a folder simply labeled Supply Chain. It contained 22 links. To the uninitiated, these were just websites for lumberyards, chemical plants, and hardware distributors. To me, they were the arteries that kept the heart of Mercer Woodworks beating. My family believed that a workshop ran on electricity and sawdust. They thought that if you turned on the lights and unlocked the front door, furniture would simply manifest itself through some sort of industrial magic. Graham, my stepfather, liked to walk around the shop floor with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops, nodding at the loud noises the machines made. Convinced that his presence alone was what drove productivity, Caroline, my mother, treated the business like a social club, charming clients in the showroom while having absolutely no concept of how the credenza they were buying actually came into existence. They saw the skin of the business. I controlled the blood. I clicked on the first link, Northern Hardwoods Distribution. This was our primary supplier for domestic timber. Currently, there was a massive order pending for delivery at 8 in the morning tomorrow. It was 6,000 board feet of quarter-sawn white oak and another 2,000 feet of premium black walnut. We needed it for the Harrison Library renovation, a project that was already running on a razor-thin timeline. I stared at the order summary. The total cost was $18,400. My eyes drifted to the billing information section. There it was, in clear, bold text, billed to Harper Lopez, personal guarantee on file. 3 years ago, Graham had forgotten to pay the lumber yard for 3 consecutive months. He had hidden the overdue notices in his desk drawer, hoping the problem would vanish if he simply ignored it. When the supplier finally cut us off, threatening to sue, it was my credit score and my personal savings that had smoothed things over. Since that day, the account had remained in my name. The supplier trusted me. They did not trust Mercer Woodworks. I moved my cursor to the button labeled Modify Order. Then, I selected Cancel Entire Shipment. A dialog box popped up, asking for a reason. I typed Unauthorized Change in Facility Access. Account holder no longer associated with the delivery address. I hit Enter. The screen refreshed. The status bar turned from green to red. Order canceled. I sat back for a moment, letting the weight of that click settle in. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, Graham would be standing at the loading dock, coffee in hand, waiting for a truck that was never coming. He would have a crew of 4 guys standing around on the clock at $25 an hour, waiting to unload wood that was currently sitting in a warehouse in Wisconsin. But I was not done, not even close. I moved to the next tab. This one was for our finishing supplies. We used a specialized 2-part oil finish imported from Germany. It was expensive, temperamental, and absolutely beautiful. It was our signature. It was what allowed us to charge double what our competitors charged. The login for the distributor required 2-factor authentication. My phone buzzed. I typed in the code. I went to the Recurring Shipments tab. We had 10 gallons scheduled to ship out on Thursday. I canceled it. Then, I went into the account settings and removed the credit card on file, my credit card, and replaced it with the company's old checking account number, the one I knew had been dormant and empty for 6 months because I was the one who stopped using it. When the automated system tried to charge that card for the next order, it would decline. The distributor, a notoriously strict German firm, would immediately flag the account and freeze all future shipments until the debt was paid and a new credit check was performed. That process usually took 3 weeks. Graham did not know the password to this account. He did not even know the name of the sales representative. He just knew that the brown cans appeared on the shelf when he needed them. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about supply chain logistics. I worked my way down the list with surgical precision. I canceled the scheduled maintenance for the massive CNC router. The technician was supposed to come on Friday to calibrate the spindle. Without that calibration, the machine would start cutting with a margin of error that would ruin any precision joinery. I canceled the account with the sharpening service that picked up our saw blades every Tuesday. By next week, every blade in that shop would be dull, burning the wood instead of cutting it. It took me 45 minutes to sever every single external lifeline the shop had. Then, I turned my attention to the internal organs, the contracts. This was the part that required not just anger, but legal foresight. I opened the folder on my desktop where I kept the digital copies of our active client agreements. There were 5 major production contracts currently in play. These were not small residential jobs. These were commercial contracts that kept the lights on. I pulled up the agreement for the boutique hotel downtown. We were building 40 custom headboards and matching nightstands. It was a 6-figure job. I scrolled down to the clause on page 4. Paragraph 3. Key Personnel Clause. I had inserted this clause into every major contract I had drafted over the last 2 years. I did it because I knew, deep down, that my family was volatile. I needed to protect my professional reputation. The clause stated that the project timeline and quality guarantees were contingent upon Harper Lopez acting as the lead project manager. It gave the client the right to terminate the contract immediately if I was removed from the project without their prior written consent. Caroline and Graham never read the contracts. They just looked at the total dollar amount at the bottom and signed. They assumed that legalese was just filler. I opened my email client. I composed a new message. I added the 5 main contacts for our biggest projects to the blind copy line. Subject: urgent update regarding Mercer Woodworks. Project management. To whom it may concern. Effective immediately. I am no longer employed at or affiliated with Mercer Woodworks. As of this evening, my access to the facility has been revoked by the owners. Consequently, I can no longer guarantee the production timelines, quality control, or material sourcing for your ongoing projects as stipulated in the key personnel clause of our agreement. Please direct all future communication regarding your deposits, schedules, and deliverables to Graham Mercer and Caroline Mercer. I have attached the relevant termination clauses from your contracts for your reference. Sincerely, Harper Lopez. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. Canceling a lumber delivery was an annoyance. Sending this email was a nuclear strike. This would cause panic. These clients had deadlines. The hotel needed those headboards for their grand opening next month. When they read this, their first call would not be to me. It would be to their lawyers. Then their lawyers would call Graham. I imagined the scene tomorrow. The phone in the office would start ringing at 9 in the morning. Graham would pick it up, expecting a new customer, and instead, he would be met with a screaming project manager from the hotel threatening to pull the contract and demand their $40,000 deposit back. A deposit that I knew for a fact Graham and Caroline had already spent on a new leasing down payment for Trevor's truck and a vacation to Cabo that they were planning for next month. They did not have the cash to refund these deposits. If the clients pulled out, the business would be insolvent within 30 days. I pressed send. The whoosh sound of the email leaving my outbox seemed deafening in the quiet apartment. I closed the laptop and sat back in the dark. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. I checked the time. It was now 9:30. My family was likely at home right now, probably sitting in the living room watching television. Graham would have a beer in his hand. Caroline would be scrolling through Facebook, perhaps posting some vague, passive-aggressive status update about how hard it is to be a parent to ungrateful children. Trevor would be texting his friends, bragging about how he was going to take over the manager's office, my office, tomorrow. They were comfortable. They were sleeping soundly on a bed of dynamite, completely unaware that I had just lit the fuse. They thought that by taking away my keys, they had taken away my power. It was such a fundamental misunderstanding of what power actually was. They thought power was possession. They thought it was owning the building, holding the deed, having the right to say, get out. But in the modern world, power is access. Power is information. Power is being the only person who knows the password to the server, the only person who has the personal cell phone number of the lumberyard foreman, the only person whose name is on the credit application that keeps the lights on. They had locked me out of the building, yes, but in doing so, they had locked themselves inside a machine they did not know how to operate. I walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. I felt a strange hunger, the kind that comes after a long, exhausting physical exertion. I made a sandwich, eating it standing up over the sink. The numbness was starting to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I thought about the sawdust. The way it felt to run a rough board through the planer and see the grain reveal itself. I loved that shop. I loved the smell of it, the noise of it, the potential of it. It broke my heart to dismantle it, but they had forced my hand. They wanted the fruit without tending to the tree. Now, they were going to find out that the tree was rotten without the gardener. I finished my sandwich and washed the plate. I was methodical in everything I did. That was why I was a good carpenter. Measure twice, cut once. I went back to the living room and looked at my phone. No new messages. They still had no idea. A small, grim smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a chess player who sees checkmate in 5 moves while the opponent is still trying to figure out how the knight moves. Tomorrow, the sun would rise, the birds would sing, and Mercer Woodworks would wake up to find that its arteries had been severed while it slept. I turned off the lamp and walked to my bedroom. For the first time in years, I was going to sleep with my phone on silent. Whatever happened tomorrow, the panic, the screaming, the desperate voicemails, was not my problem. I was just a stranger now. And strangers do not solve family emergencies. I pulled the duvet up to my chin. The sheets were cool. I closed my eyes and visualized the workshop one last time. I visualized the silence of the machines, the empty loading dock, the dark computer screens demanding passwords that no one knew. It was a tragedy, really. But as I drifted off to sleep, I reminded myself of one indisputable fact. I did not build the coffin. I just hammered in the nails they handed me. The morning sun that filtered through my blinds was not the gentle awakening of a new day. It felt more like an interrogation lamp, harsh and revealing. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city of Silverford wake up around me. Usually, by this hour, I would already be at the shop. I would be covered in a fine layer of sawdust, my ears ringing with the hum of the air filtration system, my mind occupied with cut lists and delivery schedules. Today, however, I was just a woman in a quiet apartment with a bank account that was far too empty for someone who had worked as hard as I had. I sat up and reached for the notebook on my nightstand. It was a habit. I always wrote down tasks. But today, instead of a to-do list, I found myself writing numbers, big numbers, numbers that I had kept locked away in the back of my mind, suppressed under layers of familial guilt and obligation. $168,000. That was the number. It was not an estimate. It was a calculation I had run 1,000 times in the dark watches of the night. That was the sum total of every cent I had poured into Mercer Woodworks over the last decade. It was the price of my admission into a family that had never really wanted me, only my utility, to understand why I would give that much money to people who would eventually lock me out. You have to understand the architecture of my family. It was a structure built on a faulty foundation. I was 14 years old when my mother, Caroline, married Graham Mercer. I was not a Mercer, I was Harper Lopez, the daughter of a man who had left before my first birthday and never looked back. When Graham entered the picture, he did not try to be a father. He treated me like an existing condition of the real estate he was acquiring. I was part of the package deal with Caroline, like a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the decor but was too heavy to move. Graham was a carpenter. He had a small, struggling shop that made basic cabinets. He was good with his hands, but terrible with his head. He had no mind for business, no concept of efficiency, and a terrifying ability to ignore debt. My indoctrination into the family business began 2 weeks after the wedding. I was not asked to help. I was told, "We need the shop swept," Graham had said, tossing a broom at me while I was doing my homework. "If you are going to live under this roof, you contribute." That was the mantra. Contribution. But the definition of contribution was fluid. For me, it meant labor. For them, it meant existence. I started with sweeping, then I moved to sanding. Hours and hours of hand sanding cabinet doors until my fingerprints were practically erased. By the time I was 17, I was running the table saw. By 21, I was designing entire kitchen layouts and executing the installation. I did not do this because I had a burning passion for sawdust at that age. I did it because I was desperate to be useful. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I became indispensable, the feeling of being an outsider would vanish. I thought the sweat would act as a binding agent, gluing me to this new family unit. But then came Trevor. Trevor was born a year after the marriage. My half-brother, the true Mercer heir. From the moment Trevor took his first breath, the dynamic shifted. Trevor was not expected to contribute. Trevor was the prize. He was the golden child who was protected from the harsh realities of the world, realities that I was forced to navigate daily. While I was spending my weekends staining decks to pay for my own textbooks, Trevor was getting driven to soccer practice in a brand new SUV, while I was 17, negotiating with angry lumber suppliers because Graham had bounced a check. Trevor was being told that his only job was to have fun and be a kid. I remembered the day I realized that my money was not my own. I was 24. I had been working 2 jobs, one at the shop during the day and another bartending at night. I was saving every penny to move out, to maybe go to design school in Chicago. I had managed to scrape together $40,000. It was my freedom fund. Then came the rain. It was a Tuesday in November. A massive storm hit Silverford, the roof of the workshop, which Graham had been promising to fix for 5 years, finally gave way. Water poured in directly over the finishing room. It destroyed 3 custom dining sets that were due for delivery that Friday. It flooded the office. It ruined the electrical panel. I arrived at the shop to find Graham sitting on a wet stack of plywood, his head in his hands. Caroline was pacing. crying about how they were going to lose the business, how they would lose the house, how they would be destitute. They did not look at me as a daughter. They looked at me as a resource. "Harper," Caroline had said, grabbing my wet hands, "you have savings, right? You have that money you have been putting away from the bar." I felt a cold stone drop in my stomach. "That is for school. Mom, that is for my apartment." "We will pay you back," Graham had interjected, his voice thick with desperation. "It is just a loan. We just need to fix the roof and replace the inventory. If we don't, we go under. Do you want to see your brother on the street? Do you want this family to fail?" That was the hook, the guilt, the weaponization of the collective against the individual. I wrote the check, $42,000 to replace the roof and the electrical system. I emptied my account. I stayed in my tiny studio apartment. I did not go to design school. They never paid me back. Not a cent. Every time I brought it up, it was met with defensiveness. "We are putting food on the table," Graham would say. "The business is struggling. Harper, why are you so greedy?" Greedy. They called me greedy for wanting my own money back, while they drove leased cars paid for by the business I had just saved. But it did not stop there. It became a pattern, a systemic extraction of my value. 3 years later, I saw that the industry was changing. Hand carving was noble, but it was slow. If we wanted to compete with the bigger firms, we needed automation. We needed a CNC machine. It would triple our output and allow us to take on complex commercial jobs. Graham refused. "Too expensive," he said. "We do things the old way." I knew he was wrong. I knew that without it, we would die a slow death. So, I took out a personal loan. I leveraged my own credit, which was stellar compared to the business's rating. I bought the machine. $35,000 for the unit, another $10,000 for the software and tooling. I installed it myself. I learned the programming language at night. Within 6 months, that machine was generating 60% of our revenue. Did I get a partnership stake? Did I get equity? "Good job, Harper," Graham had said, patting the machine like he had bought it himself. "This thing really hums." Then there were the Festool system tools, sanders, domino joiners, dust extractors, another $12,000 charged to my credit card, because Graham said the company card was maxed out this month. There were the supplier bills I paid quietly to keep the wood coming. There were the late fees on the property tax I covered, so the county wouldn't put a lien on the building. I added it all up in my notebook. Roof and electrical, $42,000. CNC machine and setup, $45,000. Festool ecosystem, $12,000. Materials paid personally over 8 years, roughly $55,000. Emergency tax payments, $14,000. Total, $168,000. And what did Trevor get during this time? Trevor got a full scholarship to a private college because on paper, the family business made no money because Graham hid the profits to buy toys. When Trevor graduated with a degree in general studies and decided he wanted to join the business, Graham bought him a brand new Ford F-150. "The boy needs a reliable truck for site visits," Graham had argued. I was driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked bumper. I was the one doing the site visits. Trevor spent his days in the office watching YouTube videos and managing social media, which mostly consisted of him posting photos of work I had done and taking credit for it. I looked down at the notebook, the ink stark against the white paper. The tragedy wasn't the money. Money can be earned again. The tragedy was the lie I had told myself. I had told myself that this was what families did. They supported each other. But support is a two-way street. This was not support. This was parasitism. I remembered a dinner conversation from 2 months ago. It was Trevor's birthday. We were at a steakhouse paid for by the company. Of course, I was exhausted. I had just finished a 14-hour shift, finishing a custom mahogany bar for a client. My back was throbbing. My hands were stained with dark walnut dye that no amount of scrubbing could remove. "You look tired, Harper," my mother had said, sipping her wine. "I am tired," I admitted. "I think I need to hire an assistant. I can't keep running the floor and the installations alone." Graham laughed. It was a dismissive, heavy sound. "You don't need help. Harper, you are strong. You have always been the strong one. You can handle it. You are strong. That phrase, it sounded like a compliment, but it was actually a curse. In my family, being strong was just code for we don't need to worry about you. Being strong meant that my needs were irrelevant. Being strong meant that I could take the weight of the world on my shoulders so they didn't have to lift a finger. Because I was strong, I could pay for the roof. Because I was strong, I could work 80 hours a week while Trevor worked 20. Because I was strong, I didn't need a thank you, or a stake in the company, or even a kind word. They had weaponized my resilience. They had turned my competence into their convenience. I closed the notebook. The anger that had been simmering in my chest began to cool into something harder, something more useful. It was the same feeling I got when I looked at a piece of rough lumber and saw the furniture hidden inside it. I was analyzing the material. I was seeing the flaws. They had forgotten one crucial detail about the investment I had made. When you buy a machine, you get a receipt. When you pay for a roof, you get an invoice. When you cover a debt, you create a paper trail. They thought that because we were family, these transactions were gifts. They thought that the silence of the last 10 years was consent. They thought that Harper the Strong would just absorb the loss of $168,000, because that is what she always did. She absorbed the pain so the family could stay comfortable, but the lock on the door had broken the spell. I was not strong anymore, not in the way they wanted me to be. I was not the pillar holding up their roof. I was the creditor. I stood up and walked to the closet. I pulled out a plastic bin from the top shelf. Inside were manila folders, meticulously organized, every receipt, every bank statement, every email where Graham promised to pay me back when things pick up. I had kept them, not because I planned to sue them, but because a part of me, the part that wasn't blinded by the desperate need for my mother's love, knew that this day might come. I ran my hand over the file labeled CNC Purchase Agreement. It was in my name. The financing was in my name. The warranty was in my name. Technically, that machine didn't belong to Mercer Woodworks. It belonged to Harper Lopez. It was just being stored at their facility, and the law has very specific rules about people who refuse to return property that does not belong to them. I looked at the phone. Still no calls from them. They were probably at the shop right now. Trevor trying to figure out why the computer wouldn't log in. Graham wondering where the lumber truck was. They hadn't even realized yet that the machinery they were standing next to was effectively stolen goods. "You're strong. You can handle it," I whispered to myself, mimicking Graham's voice. Yes, I could handle it. I could handle it in a way they never taught me, in a language they didn't speak. I picked up the stack of documents. They were heavy. They weighed exactly as much as my lost 20s, my sacrificed education, and my broken trust. It was time to call in the debt, and the interest rate was going to be devastating. By 9 o'clock in the morning, my phone had ceased to be a communication device and had transformed into a frantic, vibrating creature dancing across my coffee table. I sat on my sofa, a mug of black coffee in my hands, watching the screen light up with a relentless, stroboscopic rhythm. Buzz, flash, buzz, flash. It was a fascinating sociological experiment. I was witnessing the 5 stages of grief play out in real time through digital notifications. But my family seemed to be stuck in a violent loop between denial and anger. I did not pick up the phone. I did not mute it. I simply watched it, like a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction from behind a thick pane of safety glass. The first wave had come from Trevor. It arrived at 8:15, exactly 15 minutes after the lumber truck failed to appear at the loading dock. I reached out and tapped the screen just enough to read the preview without sending a read receipt. "Trevor, stop being a child. The login for the server isn't working and I can't print the shipping labels. Whatever password you changed it to, send it now. The guys are standing around doing nothing." I took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness of the roast felt grounding. "Stop being a child." That was his opening gambit. Not a question about why I had done it. Not a moment of reflection on the fact that he was currently sitting in a chair I had paid for, trying to access a computer I had built. To Trevor. My refusal to facilitate his unearned promotion was simply a tantrum. He viewed my systemic dismantling of the company's infrastructure as an annoyance, like a fly buzzing in his ear, rather than the structural collapse that it actually was. He followed up 3 minutes later. Trevor. Seriously, Harper. This isn't funny. Dad is freaking out about the lumber. Just send the codes and stop being a drama queen. You're embarrassing yourself. I almost laughed. I was sitting in my pajamas, perfectly calm, while he was the one standing in a silent factory with a crew of confused workers, unable to perform the most basic functions of his job. Yet, in his mind, I was the one who should be embarrassed. It was a breathtaking display of cognitive dissonance. Then came Graham. Graham did not text. Graham called. He was a man who believed that his voice carried a weight of authority that could bend reality to his will. The phone rang for 45 seconds straight. Then it stopped. Then it rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. I waited for the notification that a message had been left. When it appeared, I pressed play, putting it on speaker so his voice filled my small living room. Harper, pick up the phone. Graham's voice was tight, strained, but trying to maintain a facade of control. The lumber yard says the order was canceled. They are saying you called it in. There must be some mistake. I have the Miller crew here waiting for that white oak. Call the supplier back immediately and fix this. Tell them it was a glitch, and bring the keys back. We need to access the finish room supply closet and the spare key is missing. This isn't the time for games. Call me back. I listened to the message twice. There must be some mistake. He could not conceive of a world where I would intentionally hurt the business. In his mind, I was the eternal fixer. I was the one who smoothed things over, who absorbed the shocks, who made the impossible happen. Even after he had changed the locks to keep me out, he still expected me to act as his safety net. He wanted to fire me, but he still wanted me to do the work. He wanted to exile me, but he still expected me to pay the taxes on his kingdom. There was no apology in his voice. There was no, Harper, we need to talk about what happened last night. There was only the imperative command, fix this. Restore my comfort. Make the problem go away. He did not ask why I had canceled the order. He did not ask how I was feeling about being evicted from the company I helped build. He only cared that the wood was not there. That was the horror of it. It wasn't the yelling or the insults that cut the deepest. It was the complete and total absence of my humanity in their eyes. To Graham and Trevor, I was not a person with feelings, a history, or a breaking point. I was an appliance. I was a toaster that had suddenly stopped making toast. You do not apologize to a broken toaster. You jiggle the cord. You hit it. You get frustrated that it isn't doing the one thing it was designed to do. I was a resource to them. Nothing more. I was an extraction point for labor and capital. Now that the resource had cut off the supply, they weren't sad. They were just hungry. Then came the third wave, the most public wave. My phone pinged with a notification from Facebook. It was a tag. Caroline Mercer tagged you in a post. My stomach tightened. Caroline's weapon of choice had always been social perception. She lived her life for an audience, curating a version of our family that existed only in pixels and posed photographs. I opened the app. There was a photo of the three of them, Caroline, Graham, and Trevor standing in front of the workshop sign. It was an old photo, taken 2 years ago when we won a local small business award. I had taken the photo, which was why I wasn't in it. The caption read, "Heartbroken today." It is a sad day when you realize that greed can turn family against family. We are trying to keep our humble business running, but sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who hold the knife. Please pray for Mercer Woodworks as we navigate a difficult betrayal. We will not let sabotage stop us from serving our community. Family first heartbroken betrayal. I read the comments that were already flooding in. Oh no, Caroline. What happened? Sending prayers. Hope you guys are okay. Money changes people. Sadly, stay strong. Is this about Harper? I always thought she seemed a bit distant. I watched the likes climb, 20, 30, 50. She was painting a narrative in real time, She was casting herself as the martyr and me as the villain. She didn't name me explicitly in the text, but tagging me made it clear to everyone in our small town exactly who the knife holder was. She was using the community's goodwill to insulate herself from the truth. She called it sabotage. She called it greed. She didn't mention the $168,000 I had invested. She didn't mention the unpaid labor. She didn't mention the lockout. She didn't mention that the sabotage was simply me retrieving my own property and removing my name from liabilities I no longer controlled. To Caroline, my refusal to be exploited was an act of aggression. I put the phone down on the table, face down this time. The silence in the room felt different now. Before, it was the silence of anticipation. Now, it was the silence of a funeral. I realized then that I had been waiting for something that was never going to come. Deep down, in a small, foolish corner of my heart, I had hoped that my drastic actions would serve as a wake-up call. I had hoped that when the lumber didn't arrive, when the passwords didn't work, they would pause. I hoped they would look at each other and say, "My God, we pushed her too far. We need to fix this relationship." I wanted them to fight for me. Not for the passwords, not for the money, not for the wood. I wanted them to fight for Harper. But they weren't doing that. They were fighting for the status quo. They were angry that the servant had stopped serving. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. People were walking their dogs. Cars were driving by. The world was continuing, completely indifferent to the fact that my entire history was being rewritten by the people who were supposed to protect it. A profound sense of loneliness washed over me. But it was not the hot, panicked loneliness of abandonment. It was a cold, clinical isolation. It was the realization that I had been an orphan for a long time. I just hadn't noticed because I was too busy working. I thought about the years I had spent trying to buy their approval. The late nights finishing rush orders so Graham wouldn't look bad. The weekends spent balancing the books so Caroline wouldn't have to worry about the overdraft fees. I had poured 15 years of my life into a black hole, hoping that if I filled it enough, it would eventually reflect some light back at me. But black holes don't reflect light. They only consume. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Trevor. "Trevor, Mom is crying. I hope you're happy. You're ruining everything just because you're jealous. If you don't fix this by noon, don't bother coming to Christmas." Jealous, I said the word aloud, testing the weight of it on my tongue. He thought I was jealous of him. He thought I wanted his position, his unearned authority, his leased truck. He didn't understand that I didn't want his life. I just wanted my dignity. "Don't bother coming to Christmas." That was the threat, the ultimate leverage. Exclusion from the family ritual. In the past, that threat would have brought me to my knees. The fear of being left out, of sitting alone on a holiday, would have made me apologize. I would have driven to the shop, unlocked the server, called the lumberyard, and begged for forgiveness just to secure my seat at a table where I was ignored anyway. But today, the threat felt hollow. It was like threatening a prisoner with freedom. I went back to the table and picked up the phone. I did not reply to Trevor. I did not reply to Graham. I did not comment on Caroline's post. Instead, I opened my contacts list. I scrolled past Mom. I scrolled past Dad, which was what I had foolishly listed Graham as for years. I found the number I needed. I was done waiting for an apology. I was done waiting for them to recognize my humanity. If they wanted to treat this as a business transaction, if they wanted to view me as a malfunctioning asset rather than a human being, then I would oblige them. I would speak to them in the only language that a business understands. I would speak in the language of liability. They wanted to know where the money was. They wanted to know why the wood wasn't there. They wanted to make public accusations about betrayal and theft, fine. If I was a stranger to them, then I would be the most dangerous kind of stranger. I would be a stranger with a lawyer. I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice. "Margot Daniels, attorney at law." A bright, sharp voice answered. "Hi, Margot," I said, my voice steady, stripped of all the emotion that Caroline was currently splashing all over the internet. "It's Harper. Do you have a moment? I have a situation regarding unjust enrichment and intellectual property theft that I need to discuss, and I think we need to move quickly." There was a pause on the other end, then the shift in tone that comes when a friend becomes a professional. "I'm listening. Harper, tell me everything." I looked at the notifications still stacking up on my screen, the pleas, the insults, the guilt trips. "They aren't going to stop, Margot," I said quietly. "They don't think I'm real. They think I'm just a vending machine that ate their dollar. I need you to help me show them exactly how much this machine costs." I turned my back on the window. The mourning period was over. The time for sentimentality had passed the moment Caroline posted that photo. They wanted a villain. They wanted a traitor. I would give them something much worse. I would give them a creditor. The air in Margot Daniels' office was different from the air in my apartment. It was conditioned, filtered, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and dry toner. Sitting across from her, separated by a glass desk that cost more than my first car, I felt the chaotic noise of the last 12 hours finally begin to settle into a coherent frequency. Margot was a friend from high school, but she had shed the softness of our youth somewhere between passing the bar exam and making partner at her firm. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that looked like armor. She listened to my story without interrupting, her pen hovering over a yellow legal pad, making scratching sounds that were rhythmically soothing. I told her everything. I told her about the lock change. I told her about the text message. I told her about the $168,000 in direct investments I had made over the last decade. I told her about the 15 years of underpaid and often unpaid labor. When I finished, I sat back, expecting sympathy. I expected her to say, "Oh, Harper, that is terrible." Instead, Margot capped her pen with a sharp click and looked at me with eyes that were devoid of pity but full of professional calculation. "This is not a family dispute, Harper," she said, her voice cool and precise. "Stop calling it that. Family disputes are about who sits where at Thanksgiving. This is a complex case of unjust enrichment, conversion of assets, and breach of implied contract." She pulled the legal pad closer to her. "You have been operating under the assumption that you were a family member contributing to a communal pot," she continued. "But legally, based on their actions last night, they have defined you as an external entity by locking you out. They have severed the familial veil. They cannot have it both ways. They cannot treat you as an employee to be fired and a family member to be exploited simultaneously." She circled a number on her pad. $168,000. She read aloud. "That is the hard cost. The receipts, the loans, the credit card statements, that is verifiable debt. But we are going to go further." She wrote 2 words in block letters at the top of the page. "Quantum meruit." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It is Latin," Margot explained, leaning forward. "It means as much as he has earned." It is a legal principle used when there is no written contract, but one party has benefited from the services of another, and it would be unjust to allow them to keep that benefit without paying for it. Your parents accepted your labor, your management, and your technical expertise for 15 years. They knew you expected a future interest in the company that was the implied promise of one day this will be yours. By locking you out, they have breached that understanding. She tapped the paper. "We are not just asking for the loan money back, Harper. We are calculating the market value of your labor for the last decade. A project manager with your skill set commands a salary of roughly $85,000 a year in this state. If they paid you $20,000, they owe you the difference, multiplied by 10 years, plus interest." I stared at her. The numbers were staggering. I had never thought of my time as a commodity with a price tag. I had just given it, freely, because I thought that was what love looked like. "They don't have that kind of money," I said quietly. "If we sue them for back wages, they will go bankrupt." Margot smiled. It was a shark's smile, terrifying and beautiful. "Exactly," she said. "That is our leverage. We do not want to bankrupt them immediately. We want to present them with a choice they cannot refuse." She turned to her computer and began to type. The sound of her mechanical keyboard was like automatic gunfire. "I am drafting a formal demand letter," she said as she typed. "This is the first shot across the bow. We are going to state our claim clearly. We are asserting that your payments were loans, not gifts, evidenced by the fact that the business is a commercial entity and you were a non-owner investor. We are demanding immediate repayment of the principal sum of $168,000. She paused, looking at me over the rim of her glasses. "However, since we know they are liquid poor, we will offer an alternative settlement. In lieu of cash payment, we will accept a transfer of equity. To satisfy the debt and the claim of Quantum Merowit, they will transfer 60% of the ownership shares of Mercer Woodworks to Harper Lopez." My breath hitched. 60%, that would make me the majority owner. It would mean you own the company, Margot finished for me. It would mean Graham and Caroline work for you. It would mean you decide who has the keys. You decide who gets fired. You decide if Trevor gets a salary. I looked out the window of her office. From the 10th floor, the cars looked like toys. The idea seemed impossible. Graham had ruled that workshop like a petty tyrant for as long as I could remember. The idea of him handing over control was inconceivable. "They will never sign that," I said. "Graham would rather burn the building down." "He might want to," Margot said, printing the document. "But here is the kicker. If they do not respond to this letter within 48 hours with a settlement offer, we file a civil suit, and the moment we file, I will petition the court for a prejudgment writ of attachment. In English, Margot, it means we freeze their assets," she said simply. "We freeze the business accounts. We put a lien on the building. We put a lien on the machinery, specifically the CNC machine you paid for. We stop them from selling, trading, or moving anything until the court case is settled. Since you have proof of purchase for the major assets, the court will likely grant it. We will effectively shut them down. They won't be able to buy lumber. They won't be able to pay payroll. They won't be able to pay themselves." She handed me the document. It was 3 pages long, printed on heavy bond paper. The language was dense, aggressive, and devoid of any emotion. It did not mention Mom or Dad. It referred to Caroline Mercer and Graham Mercer as the debtors. It referred to me as the creditor. I read the final paragraph. "Failure to remit payment or agree to the proposed equity restructuring by 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday will result in immediate litigation seeking full damages, legal fees, and the attachment of all commercial assets." "This is war," I whispered. "No," Margot corrected me. "Changing the locks was an act of war. This is a treaty negotiation where you are the only one with a nuke." She pressed a button on her intercom. "Send the courier in, please." A young man entered the office a moment later, holding a heavy envelope. "We are serving this via direct courier," Margot said. "Require a signature. Hand it directly to Graham Mercer or Caroline Mercer. Do not leave it with a receptionist. Do not leave it with the son." "Understood," the courier said. He took the envelope. It looked innocuous, just a packet of paper. But I knew it contained the end of life as my family knew it. "When will they get it?" I asked. Margot checked her watch. "It is 11 o'clock now. He will be at the workshop by 11:30. They are probably still scrambling to figure out why the lumber didn't show up. This will clarify things for them." I signed the retainer agreement. My hand did not shake. For the first time in 32 years, I was not reacting to them. I was not dodging their blows or patching up their mistakes. I was setting the terms of engagement. "What do I do now?" I asked, standing up. "You go home." Margot said, "You turn off your phone, or better yet, you block their numbers and direct all communication to my office. That is the most important part. Harper, you cannot speak to them. If they call crying, you hang up. If they show up at your door, you do not open it. Any word you say can be used to argue that you are waiving your claim. You are a silent statue until they sign." I walked out of the building and into the bright, mid-morning sunlight. The world looked sharper. The colors seemed more vivid. I realized that the heavy weight I had been carrying in my chest, the crushing pressure of their expectations, their judgment, Their demands was gone. It had been replaced by the cold, hard weight of the law. They thought they were dealing with a daughter who could be bullied into submission with a Facebook post and a guilt trip. They thought they were dealing with a girl who was afraid of being unloved. They did not understand that they had accidentally created a plaintiff. I got into my car and sat there for a moment. I checked my phone one last time before enabling the Do Not Disturb mode. There were 12 missed calls from Graham, 4 from Caroline, 3 nasty texts from Trevor. They were flailing. They were punching the air, trying to hit a ghost. In 30 minutes, the courier would walk through the front door of Mercer Woodworks. He would walk past the reception desk where Caroline sat. He would walk onto the shop floor where Graham was likely shouting at a subordinate. He would hand over the envelope. Graham would open it. He would put on his reading glasses. Likely annoyed at the interruption, he would scan the first paragraph. I could picture the blood draining from his face. I could picture the silence that would descend on the room as he realized that the glitch with the lumber was not a glitch at all. He would realize that the lock he changed didn't keep me out. It locked him in a cage with a lion he had forgotten to feed. I started the engine. The radio began to play a pop song, something upbeat and trivial. I turned it up. I drove home, not as a victim of domestic drama, but as the CEO of a hostile takeover. They wanted the business to stay in the family fine. I was going to take the business, and I was going to leave them with the family. The silence of my exile did not last long. It was broken not by my family, but by Margot. It was early afternoon on Wednesday. I was sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by the physical debris of my tenure at Mercer Woodworks. I had emptied out my home office, sorting through old sketches, blueprints, and material samples I had brought home over the years. I was trying to purge the physical reminders of the shop from my space, creating a pile for keep and a pile for burn. My phone rang. It was Margot's office line. I answered immediately. Expecting an update on whether the courier had delivered the demand letter, I expected to hear that Graham had called her screaming, or that Caroline had tried to charm her way out of the lawsuit. "Harper," Margot said. Her voice was different than it had been yesterday. The sharp, shark-like confidence was still there, but it was overlaid with something else, something darker. It sounded like concern. "Can you come back to my office right now?" "Did they respond to the letter?" I asked, standing up and brushing dust from my jeans. "No," Margot said. "They haven't had time to process it yet, but I did my due diligence. Before we file a suit to attach assets, I have to run a full title search on the property and a UCC lien search on the business to see if there are other creditors ahead of us in line. I need to know who else has a claim on the carcass before we start carving." She paused. The silence on the line was heavy. "Harper, you need to see this. What I found changes the narrative. This isn't just about them kicking you out to save money. This is, well, it is a lot more complicated than that. Just get here." 20 minutes later, I was back in the leather chair across from her glass desk. The afternoon sun was cutting through the blinds, slicing the room into bars of light and shadow. Margot slid a document across the desk toward me. It was a copy of a filing from the county recorder's office. "Look at the date," she instructed. I looked. The stamp was dated exactly 32 days ago. "Now look at the transaction type," she said. It was a deed of trust, a mortgage, but it wasn't from a bank. It wasn't from Wells Fargo or Chase or the local credit union. "They took out a loan against the property," I said, my brow furrowing. "But the shop was paid off. Graham bragged about burning the mortgage note 5 years ago." "They took out a new one," Margot said. "A private money loan, high interest, short term. Look at the lender." I moved my eyes to the line labeled Beneficiary, Barrett Holdings, LLC. The name sat there on the paper, innocent in its typography, but violent in its implication. "Barrett," I whispered. The name tasted like copper in my mouth. "Lucas Barrett." Margot nodded. "The one and only. The man who owns half the commercial real estate on the waterfront. The man who builds luxury condos and gentrifies neighborhoods." I felt the blood drain from my face. Why would Graham borrow money from Lucas Barrett? We didn't need capital. The business was cash flow positive because of the changes I made. We didn't need a loan. Look at the amount. Harper, I looked, $450,000. I stared at the number. It was massive. It was nearly half the value of the building itself. Where did this money go? I asked, my voice rising. I manage the books. I see every deposit. I see every withdrawal. $450,000 never hit the Mercer Woodworks operating account. I would have noticed $500,000 showing up. It didn't go to the business account, Margot said, pulling another sheet of paper. I have a friend at the title company. She did some digging for me. The funds were dispersed directly to a personal joint account held by Graham and Caroline Mercer. And then, a significant portion was wire transferred the same day to a wedding planning service in Chicago and a luxury car dealership. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a car crash. Lucas Barrett, Trevor, Shelby, I said. The name came out as a gasp. Trevor had been dating Shelby Barrett for 2 years. She was Lucas Barrett's daughter. She was a nice enough girl, I suppose, but she existed in a stratosphere of wealth that my family only watched on television. She drove a Range Rover. She vacationed in the Alps. When Trevor proposed to her 3 months ago, Graham and Caroline had been ecstatic. They didn't just see a marriage. They saw an ascension. They saw their son marrying into the royalty of Silverford. I looked at Margot, my eyes wide with horror. The wedding. They are paying for a massive wedding. And Trevor's new truck. They financed it all. It gets worse, Margot said. She leaned forward, her expression grim. I pulled the terms of the loan. This isn't a standard mortgage. It has a balloon payment due in 6 months. If they default, there is no foreclosure process. There is a deed in lieu of foreclosure clause. It means if they miss the payment, Lucas Barrett takes the title to the workshop immediately. No court, no auction. He just takes the keys. They can't pay that back in 6 months, I said. Even with me running the shop, we net maybe $200,000 a year in profit. There is no way they can generate $450,000 in 6 months. They are setting themselves up to lose the building. Unless, Margot said, losing the building is part of the plan. I stared at her. What do you mean? Think about it. Harper. Lucas Barrett is a developer. He has been trying to buy that block of the industrial district for years to build lofts. Your stepfather wouldn't sell. But now, suddenly, Graham takes a loan he knows he can't pay back. From the very man who wants the land, just weeks before his son marries that man's daughter. Margot tapped the desk. This wasn't a loan. This was a dowry. The room seemed to spin. They sold it, I said, the realization settling in my stomach like lead. They effectively sold the shop to Barrett to pay for Trevor's entry into the family. They cashed out. Exactly, Margot said. Graham and Caroline get a lump sum of cash to look rich for the wedding. Trevor gets to be the son-in-law of a tycoon, and Lucas Barrett gets the land he wants for pennies on the dollar, minus the hassle of a public sale. But why lock me out? I asked. If they are just going to lose the building in 6 months anyway, why kick me out now? Why not let me keep working until the end? Because of the key personnel clause, Margot said. And because of you. She stood up and walked to the window. Lucas Barrett is a shark. Harper. He does his homework. He knows you run that place. He knows that if he takes over the building in 6 months, and you are still there holding contracts and client relationships, you could make trouble. You could claim an ownership interest. You could sue. You are a loose end. She turned back to me. I bet one of the conditions of this loan was that the business had to be delivered unencumbered. No messy partnerships, no tenacious stepdaughters who actually know the value of the machinery. They had to clear the board before the merger could happen. I felt physically ill. This wasn't just Graham being petty. This wasn't just Caroline being dramatic. This was a conspiracy. For the last month, while I was working 12-hour days, while I was negotiating with suppliers, while I was training the new apprentices, my family had been sitting at a dinner table with Lucas Barrett, signing away my life. They had looked me in the eye at Sunday dinner. They had let me pay for the groceries. They had let me fix the leak in their bathroom sink last week, and the whole time, they knew. They knew that I was already gone. They knew that the workshop I loved, the place I had built with my own hands and my own money, was already sold to a developer to pay for flowers and champagne at Trevor's wedding. They traded me, I said. My voice broke. They traded 15 years of my life so Trevor could look like a big shot. Yes, Margot said softly. They did. I thought about the text message. Let us see if you can survive this. It wasn't a challenge. It was a dismissal. I was the old furniture that didn't fit the new aesthetic. I was the scuff mark on the floor that they needed to scrub away before the Barretts came over to inspect their purchase. The pain that hit me then was different from the pain of the night before. The night before, I had felt rejected. Now, I felt exploited. There is a profound difference. Rejection is emotional. It means you are not wanted. Exploitation is mechanical. It means you were used until you were empty, and then discarded because a newer model became available. They didn't just steal my money, I said, my voice hardening. They stole my history. They took everything I built and packaged it up as a gift for Trevor. And they assumed you would go quietly, Margot added. They assumed that you would be so hurt, so crushed by the rejection, that you would just crawl away and cry. They banked on your emotional devastation being stronger than your business sense. I looked down at the deed of trust. I saw Graham's signature. I saw Caroline's signature. The ink looked so permanent. So, I said, looking up at Margot, if Lucas Barrett has a lien on the property, does that stop us? Margot smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Oh, no. It makes it much, much more interesting. She sat back down. See, Barrett has a claim on the real estate, the bricks and mortar. But he doesn't have a claim on the operations, and he certainly doesn't have a claim on the equipment that isn't owned by the company. She pointed to my file. The CNC machine, the Festool gear, the intellectual property, the client contracts, those are yours. Harper, or, at the very least, they are contested assets. Margot leaned in. If we file our suit today, we create a cloud on the title. We alert Lucas Barrett that the collateral he accepted for his $450,000 loan is actually subject to a prior claim of unjust enrichment. We tell Lucas Barrett that he bought a stolen car. Barrett won't like that, I said. Barrett will hate it, Margot corrected. And do you know who he will hate more than us? The people who sold him the stolen car. He will go after Graham and Caroline with a ferocity that makes my demand letter look like a birthday card. I understood then. The game had changed. I wasn't just fighting my family anymore. I was stepping into the middle of a high-stakes real estate deal involving the most powerful man in town. If I sued for my share, I would essentially be blowing up the deal between the Mercers and the Barretts. I would be exposing Graham's fraud to his future in-law. I would be humiliating Trevor in front of his fiancée. If I do this, I said slowly, Trevor's wedding might be cancelled. Graham and Caroline will be exposed as frauds to the Barretts. They will lose everything. Margot looked at me. They sold you for a party. Harper, they mortgaged your future to pay for a buffet. The question isn't what will happen to them. The question is, do you care anymore? I closed my eyes. I saw the workshop. I saw the sawdust dancing in the light. I saw the years of sweat. I saw the way Graham looked at me when I asked for a raise like I was a beggar asking for scraps at his table. I opened my eyes. File the suit, I said. And Margot. Yes. Send a copy of the filing to Lucas Barrett's legal team as a courtesy. I want him to know exactly what kind of people he is doing business with. Margot nodded, already reaching for her keyboard. Consider it done. I walked out of her office. But this time, the sunlight felt cold. I wasn't just a creditor anymore. I was the whistleblower. I was about to light a match and drop it onto the bridge that connected my family to their dreams of wealth. I had always fixed things. That was my job. I fixed the machines. I fixed the mistakes. I fixed the finances. But some things are too broken to be fixed. Some things need to be demolished so you can build something clean on top of the ruins. My family had started a fire to burn me out. They didn't realize that the wind had changed direction, and I was the one holding the gasoline. I sat in the leather chair, the air in Margot's office humming with the low whir of the computer server. The revelation about Lucas Barrett and the secret mortgage had sucked the oxygen out of the room, leaving me feeling lightheaded and nauseous. I thought we had reached the bottom. I thought the betrayal had hit bedrock with the sale of the workshop to fund a wedding. I was wrong. There was a sub-basement. Margot was still scrolling through the digitized loan documents she had pulled from the county recorder's database. Her face, usually a mask of professional detachment, was screwed up in concentration. She clicked her mouse, zoomed in, and then leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "Harper," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Come look at this." I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and walked around the massive glass desk. On the screen was page 14 of the promissory note and security agreement. It was a standard dense legal block of text, the kind designed to make your eyes glaze over. "Read the section on guarantors," Margot instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the screen. I leaned in. "In the event of default by the primary borrower Mercer Woodworks, LLC, the undersigned guarantor S agree to be personally liable for the full amount of the principal, interest, and any associated legal fees. This guarantee is unconditional and extends to all personal assets of the guarantor S." "Okay," I said, rubbing my temples. "So Graham and Caroline are personally on the hook. If they don't pay Barrett back, he takes their house. That is stupid of them. But it is their problem." "Look at the signatures at the bottom," Margot said. I looked. There was Graham's signature, a jagged, messy scrawl that I had seen on thousands of paychecks. Next to it was Caroline's, looped and decorative, and below them was a third signature. I froze. My heart stopped beating for a second, then kick-started with a violent thud against my ribs. The name written on the line was Harper Lopez. I stared at it. The ink was black. The letters were formed in a style that was terrifyingly familiar. The H had the sharp upswing I used. The L in Lopez had the same loop. It looked like my signature. It was designed to look exactly like the signature I placed on vendor contracts and purchase orders every single day, but I had not signed it. "I didn't sign that," I whispered. The sound of my own voice felt foreign. "Margot, I have never seen this document in my life." Margot did not look surprised. She looked furious. "Are you absolutely certain this document was notarized 30 days ago? Were you at a bank with them? Did you sign a stack of papers without reading them?" "No," I said, my voice rising. "I haven't signed anything for Graham in 6 months, and 30 days ago, that was the week I was in Chicago for the trade show. I wasn't even in Silverford on the date this is stamped." I pointed at the screen, my finger trembling slightly. "Look at the P in Lopez. I don't cross the tail like that. That is Graham's handwriting. He has a tremor in his right hand when he tries to be precise. You can see the hesitation mark in the ink." Margot exhaled a long breath through her nose. "This isn't just unjust enrichment anymore. Harper, this is forgery. This is bank fraud. And because the loan amount is over $10,000 and crossed state lines via wire transfer, it is likely wire fraud too." She clicked to the next page. "They didn't just use the building as collateral," Margot explained, her voice razor-sharp. "The building wasn't enough. The appraisal probably came in low because the roof still needs work and the market is soft. Barrett wouldn't have loaned them $450,000 on a building worth maybe $300,000. He needed a sweetener. He needed a guarantor with a high credit score and clean assets." She looked up at me. "What is your credit score, Harper?" 780, I said automatically. I worked hard to build it. "Graham's score is probably in the low 500s, Margot guessed. He couldn't qualify for a library card, let alone a $500,000 private loan. So he used you. He used your credit history, your solvent status, and your name to secure the money. The horror of it washed over me like ice water." "So," I stammered, trying to process the magnitude of the trap, "if they default, If they don't pay Barrett back in 6 months, Barrett doesn't just take the shop, Margot finished for me. He comes after you. He garnishes your wages. He puts a lien on your personal bank accounts. If you owned a home, he would take it. Since you rent, he would destroy your credit rating so thoroughly that you wouldn't be able to rent a car for the next 7 years. You would be liable for the full $450,000. I sank into the chair next to me. This was the plan. This was the endgame. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was an exit strategy. Graham and Caroline knew they couldn't run the shop without me. They knew the business was going to fail the moment they kicked me out. They had cashed out the equity, spent the money on themselves and Trevor, and set up a scenario where the inevitable collapse would land squarely on my shoulders. They were going to let the business implode. Barrett would foreclose, and when the dust settled, Graham and Caroline would claim bankruptcy or plead poverty, while I, the strong one, the responsible one, would be left holding the debt. They were going to sacrifice my entire financial future to buy themselves 6 months of luxury. The locks, I said, realization dawning on me. That is why they changed the locks. Tell me, Margot said. It wasn't because they were mad, I said, speaking faster now as the pieces clicked into place. It wasn't an emotional reaction. It was a quarantine measure. If I was still in the office, I would see the mail from Barrett Holdings. I would answer the phone when the auditors called. I would see the new repayment schedule in the accounting software. I stood up and began to pace the small office. They had to get me out. They had to sever my access immediately because the first payment is probably coming due, or there was some verification letter arriving. They needed me blind and deaf. The text message, the nastiness, the public shaming on Facebook, it was all a smokescreen. They wanted me to be so hurt and angry that I wouldn't look at the paperwork. They wanted me to run away. I stopped pacing and looked at Margot. They aren't just bad parents, Margot. They are criminals. Yes, Margot said. They are, and they made a fatal mistake. What is that? They forged the signature of the one person who knows where all the bodies are buried. Margot turned back to her computer. This changes our strategy completely. We aren't filing a civil suit for unjust enrichment anymore. Well, we are. But that is the side dish. The main course is fraud. She looked at me. Harper, I need to ask you a very serious question. If we go down this road, if we report this forgery to the authorities and to Barrett, Graham is going to go to prison, not for a weekend, for years. Forgery of financial instruments involving this amount of money is a felony. There is no talking way out of it. Are you prepared to put your stepfather in handcuffs? I closed my eyes. I thought about the 14-year-old girl sweeping the floors until her hands bled. I thought about the 24-year-old woman emptying her savings to fix a roof that wasn't hers. I thought about the text message, "Good luck." I thought about Trevor laughing in his new truck while I drove a wreck. I thought about my name, my good name, the only thing I truly owned scrawled by a thief on a document that would enslave me to debt for decades. They had not just tried to steal my money, they had tried to murder my future. They had looked at my life and decided it was less valuable than a wedding reception. I opened my eyes. The tears were gone. The hurt was gone. The lingering wish for a family reconciliation was gone. In its place was something cold, hard, and absolutely unbreakable. He didn't act like a father when he stole my identity, I said, my voice steady and low. Why should I act like a daughter when I report a crime? I looked at the screen, at the forgery that was meant to be my tombstone. Do it, I said. Burn them down. Margot nodded. She didn't smile this time. This wasn't a game anymore. I am going to draft an affidavit regarding the forgery, Margot said, typing rapidly. We will file a police report immediately. Then, we will send a notification to Lucas Barrett. When Barrett finds out his security is based on a felony, he will call the loan immediately. He will trigger the default clause today. And the wedding, I asked. The wedding is paid for with stolen funds, Margot said without looking up. Once the accounts are frozen, those checks to the caterers are going to bounce. The Barretts are going to find out that their new in-laws aren't just broke. They are felons who tried to defraud the bride's father. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Graham was probably sitting in my chair, feeling smug. He probably thought he had won. He thought he had successfully cut out the tumor me and secured his fortune. He had no idea that I wasn't the tumor. I was the immune system. And by cutting me out, he had left himself wide open to the infection he had invited in. "Margot," I said. "Yeah. Make sure the police report mentions Caroline too." She signed right above the forgery. She knew. She watched him do it. She is an accomplice. Margot paused, then typed a few more words. "Done." I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy chain snapping. For years, I had been bound to them by guilt, by obligation, by the desperate hope that I could earn my place. That signature was the key that unlocked the chain. They had set me free. They wanted me to take the risk. They wanted me to be the strong one who cleaned up the mess. No, not this time. I was not going to be the janitor. I was going to be the demolition crew. "One more thing," I said, turning back to the desk. "When we send the packet to Barrett, include the proof of ownership for the CNC machine and the Festool equipment. Let him know that the only assets in that building with any real value don't even belong to the company he is trying to foreclose on." "I will put a cherry on top," Margot promised. I sat back down and watched the cursor blink. Every keystroke was a nail in the coffin of Mercer Woodworks. 2 days ago, I was a heartbroken daughter crying over a changed lock. Today, I was the witness for the prosecution. "Ready to sign the affidavit?" Margot asked, the printer whirring to life. "I am," I said, and this time, when I signed my name, I would make sure the world knew exactly who Harper Lopez was. Not a victim, not a guarantor, the owner. 2 days, that was all it took. 48 hours ago. I was standing outside a locked door, shivering in the metaphorical cold, wondering how I was going to pay my rent without a job. Now, I was sitting in the quiet sanctuary of Margot's conference room, watching the demolition of the Mercer dynasty take place in real time. It did not happen with an explosion or a scream. It happened with the soft, rhythmic click of a printer and the confirmation beep of an outgoing email. Margot had filed the police report at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was a comprehensive document, attached with my sworn affidavit, stating that I had never signed the guarantee for the loan from Barrett Holdings. We included handwriting samples. We included my travel records proving I was in Chicago on the date of the alleged signing. We included the bank statements showing that not a single cent of that $450,000 had ever touched my hands, or the legitimate business accounts. At 9:30, Margot sent the digital packet to Lucas Barrett's legal team. She marked it urgent notice of fraud and invalid security interest. Then, we waited. Margot told me that corporate lawyers usually take days to review things. She said to expect a counter-move by next week. She was wrong. We had underestimated the sheer ruthlessness of Lucas Barrett when he realizes he has been played. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. It was not my family. It was a news alert from the local business journal's automated feed. Local developer Lucas Barrett withdraws permit application for waterfront project. Cites internal restructuring. He is moving, Margot said, reading the same alert on her tablet. He is scrubbing his hands. He does not want a public fraud trial attached to his name right before he breaks ground on a luxury complex. He is cutting the cord. The dominoes began to fall with terrifying speed. At 11 o'clock, the social fallout began. I knew this because Silverford is a small town, and small towns run on gossip. My friend Jenna, who works at the country club where the wedding reception was booked, texted me. "Jenna, holy cow. Harper, did you hear the Barretts just canceled the wedding reservation? They forfeited the deposit. The manager is freaking out." I stared at the text. The wedding was supposed to be the coronation of Trevor Mercer. It was the event that was going to legitimize my family's desperate climbing of the social ladder. And just like that, with one phone call from a father who realized he was marrying his daughter into a family of felons, it was gone. I could only imagine the scene at the Barrett household. Lucas Barrett was not a man who tolerated embarrassment. He would have looked at that forged document, looked at the police report Margot filed, and realized that Graham Mercer had tried to trick him. He had tried to pass off a debt-ridden, hollowed-out workshop as a dowry, secured by a fake signature, to a man like Barrett. That wasn't just business. It was an insult. Trevor was the first casualty. At noon, his social media, which he lived on, went dark. His profile picture, which had been a professional shot of him and Shelby smiling in front of a vineyard, was removed. His status changed to nothing. He had lost the girl. He had lost the rich father-in-law. He had lost the future that Graham and Caroline had mortgaged my life to buy for him. And he had lost it all because his parents were too arrogant to realize that I would eventually check the paperwork. At 1 o'clock, the legal hammer came down on the workshop. Margot's paralegal walked in with a sheet of paper. "The judge granted the emergency writ of attachment," she said, handing it to Margot. "Based on the evidence of forgery and the risk of asset dissipation, the court has ordered an immediate freeze on all Mercer Woodworks accounts and assets. The sheriff's deputies are on their way to the shop now to serve the order and secure the premises." "Secure the premises?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means they are going to chain the doors," Margot said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "It means nobody goes in or out without a court order. It means Graham cannot sell a single chair. He cannot move a single tool. The business is medically induced into a coma until the fraud investigation is resolved." I leaned back in my chair. 2 days ago, Graham had changed the locks to keep me out. Today, the sheriff was putting a padlock on the door to keep him out. The irony was so rich it tasted like blood in my mouth. Then, the phone calls started. They did not come to my cell phone. I had blocked them all. They came to Margot's office line. "It is them," the receptionist said over the intercom. "Graham Mercer on line 1. He sounds distressed." Margot looked at me. "Do you want to take it? You do not have to. I can handle him." I looked at the blinking red light. For years, that light had been a command. When they called, I answered. When they needed, I gave. When they broke something, I fixed it. "Put it on speaker," I said. "I want to hear him." Margot pressed the button. "Margot, Ms. Daniels." Graham's voice filled the room. It was unrecognizable. The booming, confident baritone of the patriarch was gone. In its place was a thin, reedy sound, trembling with panic. "There has been a mistake. The police are here. They are putting tape on the doors. They are saying I am under investigation for bank fraud. You have to stop this. You have to tell them it is a misunderstanding." Margot said nothing. She just looked at me. "Harper," Graham called out, his voice cracking. "I know you are there. Harper, please, pick up. This is your father." "Stepfather," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and cold as the grave. "Harper." He sounded relieved and terrified at the same time. "Harper, listen to me. You have to drop this affidavit. You have to tell them you signed it. We can fix this. I will give you the shares. I will give you the 60% you wanted. Just tell them you forgot you signed it. If you don't, they are going to arrest me. Do you hear me? They are going to take me to jail." "I cannot tell them I signed it, Graham," I said, "because that would be perjury, and I'm not going to commit a crime to cover up yours." "It was for the family." Caroline's voice suddenly shrieked from the background. She must have grabbed the phone. She sounded hysterical. "Harper, how could you? We did this for the family. We needed the money to secure Trevor's future. We were going to pay it back. We would have handled it. You are destroying us over a signature. We are your parents." "You aren't my parents," I said. "You are my employers, and you fired me." "We didn't mean it," Caroline sobbed. "We just needed space. We were stressed. Harper, please. Trevor is in his room. He won't come out. Shelby left him. She threw the ring at him. The Barretts are threatening to sue us for the wedding costs. We are losing everything. You have to help us. You have always been the strong one. Be the bigger person. Save your family." There it was, the final manipulation. Be the bigger person. It is the phrase abusers use to ask their victims to absorb the damage one last time. I thought about the $168,000. I thought about the text message wishing me luck. I thought about the signature that would have shackled me to a $500,000 debt while they drank champagne at the country club. I am being the strong one, I said. I am strong enough to let you face the consequences of your own actions. Harper, please, Graham begged. I am an old man. I can't go to prison. I will lose the house. I will lose the shop. You already lost the shop. Graham, I said. You lost it the day you signed that deal with Barrett. You just didn't tell me. We were protecting you, Caroline screamed. We didn't want you to worry about the debt. No, I said. You didn't want me to know about the debt because you planned to pin it on me. You didn't use my name to protect me. You used my name as a shield to protect yourselves. The line went silent for a second. They knew I knew. The pretense was gone. Family doesn't use me as a shield. Caroline, I said. And family doesn't change the locks on their daughter. I will never forgive you for this, Caroline hissed. The sobbing vanished, replaced by pure, distilled venom. If you send your father to prison, you are dead to me. I was dead to you 2 days ago, I replied. I was just a ghost who paid the bills. Now, I am the ghost who called the police. I nodded to Margot. She pressed the button, severing the connection. The silence rushed back into the room, but it wasn't heavy. It felt clean. The sheriff just confirmed the site is secured, Margot said, checking her email. Graham and Caroline have been served with the restraining order. They are being escorted off the property, the CNC machine, the inventory, the computers. Everything is under lockdown until the court sorts out ownership. And the loan? I asked. Barrett declared the note in default 10 minutes ago, Margot said. Since the guarantee is proven forged, he cannot come after you. He has to go after the primary borrowers. He will liquidate their personal assets to recover his $450,000. Graham and Caroline will lose their house. They will lose their cars. They will likely face criminal charges for the forgery. I stood up and walked to the window. 2 days ago, they had everything. They had a thriving business run by me, a wealthy connection through Trevor, and a scapegoat me to handle the fallout. Now, they had nothing. Trevor was single and unemployed. Graham was facing a felony indictment. Caroline was facing bankruptcy. The workshop was closed. And I was standing in a high-rise office, holding the only thing that mattered. I didn't hold the keys to the door anymore. I held the keys to the legal system. I felt a strange vibration in my pocket. It was my phone. I pulled it out. It was a text from Trevor. I had blocked his number, but my carrier sometimes let voicemails slip through to a junk folder. I looked at the transcription. You bitch. You ruined my life. I deleted it without listening. I didn't ruin his life. I just stopped subsidizing the lie he was living. What happens next? I asked Margot. Now we wait, Margot said. Barrett will strip them of their assets. The state will prosecute the fraud. And when the dust settles, the workshop will be up for auction to satisfy the debts. She looked at me with a knowing smile. And since you are the primary creditor for the equipment inside, and you have a claim for $168,000 in unjust enrichment, you will be in a very unique position to bid on it. I looked at her. I could buy it back, I whispered. You could buy it for pennies on the dollar, Margot corrected. Without the family attached to it. I picked up my purse. Let them beg, I said. Let them scream. I am done listening. I walked out of the office. The sun was setting over Silverford. Somewhere in the distance, blue lights were flashing in front of the building I used to call home. My family was experiencing the worst day of their lives. I decided to go get a steak dinner. I had a lot of planning to do. After all, I had a business to acquire. The conference room at the mediation center was a windowless box painted a suffocating shade of beige. It was designed to be neutral ground, a place where conflicts were smoothed over with compromise and stale coffee. But today, there was no compromise in the air. There was only the sterile, metallic scent of total capitulation. I sat on one side of the mahogany table, flanked by Margot and a forensic accountant we had brought in to ensure no penny was left hidden. On the other side sat the remnants of my family. Graham looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 2 weeks. His skin, usually flushed with the ruddy complexion of a man who enjoyed his beer and his authority, was sallow and gray. He wore a suit that hung loosely on his frame, the collar of his shirt unbuttoned as if he were struggling for air. Caroline sat next to him, her posture rigid, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses that she refused to remove, even indoors. They did not look at me. They stared at the stack of documents in the center of the table as if it were a bomb that had already detonated, leaving them sifting through the ash. This was the day of judgment. We had bypassed a jury trial. The evidence Margot had compiled was so overwhelming, so undeniable, that Graham's defense attorney had essentially thrown himself on the mercy of the court to avoid a public spectacle. The forgery was proven, the fraudulent loan application was proven, the intent to defraud Lucas Barrett was proven. Barrett, true to Margot's prediction, had been ruthless. He had stripped them. To settle the debt without dragging his own name through a criminal trial, he had seized their personal savings, their retirement accounts, and placed a lien on their home. They were effectively destitute, but Barrett didn't want the workshop. He didn't want the headache of a business that was currently under a police lockdown. He just wanted his cash. That left the carcass of Mercer Woodworks on the table, and I was the only vulture with a checkbook. "Let us review the terms of the settlement," Margot said. Her voice was the only sound in the room, sharp and clear. In exchange for Ms. Lopez declining to pursue further civil damages for the $168,000 in unjust enrichment, and in exchange for her advocacy in requesting a suspended sentence regarding the forgery charges, the defendants agreed to the following. She slid a thick document across the table. Graham Mercer will plead guilty to 1 count of felony document fraud. He will accept a sentence of 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and he is permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any corporation in the state of Illinois. I watched Graham flinch. It was a light sentence, all things considered. He wasn't going to prison. I had decided, in a moment of cold pragmatism, that sending him to a cell wouldn't serve me. It wouldn't get me my money back, keeping him free, but broken and powerless was a far more effective punishment. He would have to walk around this town knowing everyone knew what he was, a man who tried to steal from his stepdaughter and got caught. Secondly, Margot continued, turning the page, to satisfy the outstanding debt to Ms. Lopez and to resolve the ownership dispute regarding the machinery and intellectual property, Graham and Caroline Mercer will transfer 100% of their equity in Mercer Woodworks, LLC, including the real estate, the inventory, and the brand name, to Harper Lopez. This transfer is immediate and irrevocable. Caroline made a small, choked sound. Her hand went to her mouth. This includes the physical building, Margot clarified, her eyes locking onto Caroline. You are signing over the deed. Today, you will have 48 hours to remove any personal effects from the office. After that, your access will be permanently rescinded. I watched them process the finality of it. This was the empire they had tried to protect. This was the legacy they had tried to hoard for their son. And now, they had to sign it over to the help, just to stay out of jail. Graham reached for the pen. His hand was shaking so violently that the tip of the ballpoint tapped a staccato rhythm against the table. He looked up, and for the first time, his eyes met mine. There was no anger in them anymore. The arrogance that had fueled him for decades was gone, extinguished by the crushing weight of reality. There was only fear, a pathetic, naked fear of a man who realized he was about to sign away his identity. "Harper," he croaked. His voice was a rasp. "The building. My grandfather built the original frame. It has been in the family for 40 years. "I know," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't waver. I didn't feel a flicker of sympathy. "And you lost it in 40 days because you got greedy. Sign the paper. Graham." He looked at the document. He looked at his lawyer, who gave him a grim nod. There was no way out. If he didn't sign, we went to trial. If we went to trial, he went to prison. And I would buy the building at a foreclosure auction anyway. This was me showing mercy. This was me letting him sleep in his own bed tonight. He signed. The scrawl was messy, jagged, nothing like the confident forgery he had put on the loan documents. Then, he pushed the paper to Caroline. Caroline did not move. She sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap. "Mrs. Mercer," Margot said gently, but with a steel undercurrent, "we need your signature on the deed transfer." Caroline took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. She looked at me, and I saw a flash of the old fire, the manipulative spark that she had used to control me for my entire life. "You are stealing it," she whispered. "You planned this. You waited for us to stumble. And you stole it." "I am not stealing anything," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "I paid for that building. I paid for it with 15 years of labor. I paid for it with my savings. I paid for it with the credit rating you tried to ruin. I am not stealing it. Caroline, I am foreclosing on the investment you forced me to make." "What about Trevor?" she hissed. "This was supposed to be his. What is he going to do? He has nothing. Shelby left him. He can't show his face at the club. If you take the shop, he has no job. He has no future." "Trevor is 27 years old," I said. "He has a degree. He has a truck. I suggest he use both to find a job that he is actually qualified for, because he is certainly not qualified to run my company." "Your company!" She spat the words out like poison. "My company," I confirmed. "Now sign the paper, or I tell Margot to withdraw the plea deal recommendation and Graham goes to a state penitentiary for 5 years. It is your choice. Do you want the building, or do you want your husband?" It was a brutal ultimatum. It was the kind of binary choice they had forced on me for years: obey or be exiled. Now, I was forcing it on them. Caroline let out a sob that sounded like a piece of fabric tearing. She grabbed the pen. She didn't read the text. She just slashed her name across the bottom line. It was an angry, violent signature. She threw the pen down. It skittered across the table and hit the floor with a loud click. "Done," Margot said, snatching the documents before Caroline could change her mind. She quickly notarized them, stamping the pages with a heavy, rhythmic thud. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed like a gavel. "The transfer is complete," Margot announced. "The deed is now in the name of Harper Lopez. The keys must be surrendered immediately." Graham reached into his pocket. He pulled out a heavy ring of keys. I recognized them instantly. There was the brass key for the front door, the silver key for the office, the small black key for the safe. He placed them on the table. He didn't push them toward me. He just left them there, a pile of metal that represented his entire life's work. I reached out and picked them up. The metal was warm from his pocket. I closed my fist around them. They felt heavy, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of control. "You should know," Graham said, staring at the table. "The community won't forgive you. They will see what you did to your own parents." "The community knows you forged a signature to defraud Lucas Barrett," I countered. "The community knows you canceled a wedding because you were broke. The community doesn't care about family feuds. Graham, they care about solvency. And right now, I am the only Mercer who can pay her bills." I stood up. The meeting was over. There was nothing left to say. "Trevor left this morning," Caroline said suddenly. Her voice was hollow. "He packed a bag and drove to his friend's house in St. Louis. He couldn't stand the shame. He said he never wants to see us again. He blames us." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "You broke our family. Harper, are you happy?" I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had watched her husband exploit me for a decade and said nothing. I looked for the guilt. I checked my internal emotional dashboard, searching for that familiar pang of shame that she had installed in me since childhood. It wasn't there. The button she was trying to press had been disconnected. "I didn't break the family, Mom," I said. It was the first time I had called her Mom in weeks, and it would be the last. "The family was already broken. It was just held together by my money. I just stopped paying for the glue. I turned to Margot. Are we finished here? We are, Margot said. Packing up her briefcase, I turned my back on them. I walked to the door. I didn't look back to see them crying. I didn't look back to see Graham burying his head in his hands. They were strangers to me now. They were just former business partners who had been bought out in a hostile takeover. I walked out of the conference room and into the hallway. The air was cooler here. I walked out of the building and into the parking lot. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat. I placed the keys on the dashboard. I looked at my hands. They were resting on the steering wheel. I expected them to be shaking. I expected the adrenaline crash to hit me, the nausea of confrontation, the somatic response to hurting the people I was biologically programmed to love. But my hands were perfectly still. I held them up in the sunlight, steady as a rock. I realized then that the bond hadn't been snapped today. It had been snapped the moment I saw that forged signature. Today was just the paperwork. I felt a sensation expanding in my chest. It wasn't happiness. Happiness feels light and bubbly. This felt deep and solid. It was peace. It was the absolute silence of a war that has finally ended. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a text message. I wasn't waiting for approval. I wasn't waiting for permission. I was entirely, terrifyingly, wonderfully free. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the foreman at the shop, the one who had been confused when the doors were chained. Foreman, hey Harper, heard the news? Sheriff just took the tape off the doors. Who do I report to tomorrow? I picked up the phone. I typed the answer with a calm, steady thumb. Harper, you report to me. Production resumes at 8 o'clock. And Dave, we are going to need to order new locks. I started the car. The engine purred. I had a workshop to run. I had a reputation to rebuild. And for the first time in history, the name on the door matched the person holding the keys. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the mediation center and my parents in the rearview mirror. I didn't check the mirror. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The past was expensive, but the future was mine, and it was fully paid for. The sign above the entrance was the first thing to change. For 40 years, a rotting wooden placard had hung there, spelling out Mercer Woodworks in peeling gold letters that no one had bothered to touch up since the late 90s. It was a testament to the stagnation that lived inside those walls. Now, 6 months later, the sun glinted off a piece of laser-cut, matte black steel. It was sharp, modern, and unashamedly bold. Lopez Crafted Company. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, sipping my coffee. Just looking at it, it still gave me a thrill every single morning. It was not just a name change, it was a reclaiming of territory. It was a flag planted in the soil of a battlefield where I had been the only soldier fighting for 15 years. I walked through the front door. The chime that rang was the same, but the energy inside was entirely different. The oppressive silence that used to hang over the shop floor, the silence of men afraid of Graham's temper, the silence of debt, the silence of secrets was gone. In its place was a chaotic, beautiful symphony of productivity. The air filtration system was humming a steady bass note. The high-pitched whine of the table saw cut through the air, harmonizing with the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a mallet striking a chisel. It smelled of fresh pine, Danish oil, and ambition. Hey, boss. I looked over toward the assembly bench. Leo waved at me. Leo was 19 years old. He had purple hair, a sleeve of tattoos down his left arm, and a piercing in his eyebrow. 6 months ago, his own father had kicked him out of the house because he wanted to be an artist instead of an accountant. He had been sleeping in his car when I found him. Graham would never have hired Leo. Graham would have called him a delinquent. I hired him because I saw the way he looked at a piece of rough walnut. I saw the hunger in his eyes, the same hunger I had at his age. Now, Leo was my lead finisher. He had a touch so light he could apply varnish without leaving a single brushstroke. "Morning, Leo," I called back. "How is that credenza coming along?" "Smooth as glass," he grinned. "Ready for the final coat by noon." I walked past him, nodding at the other 3 new hires. There was Sarah, a single mom who needed flexible hours that no other shop would give her. There was Mike, a veteran who found that sanding wood quieted the noise in his head. They were a team of misfits, cast-offs, and people who had been told they didn't fit the mold. And together, we were absolutely crushing it. I walked into my office. I had repainted the walls. The beige was gone, replaced by a crisp, clean white. Graham's heavy, imposing oak desk had been turned into firewood. I sat at a sleek, minimalist drafting table. I opened the production calendar. It was a sea of color-coded blocks. We were booked solid for the next 3 months. The boutique hotel contract, the one I had threatened to pull, had not only stayed, but they had also doubled their order once they realized the new management actually delivered on time. We had a wait list for custom residential pieces. I looked at the revenue spreadsheet. The numbers were black, deep, healthy black, without the dead weight of Graham's embezzlement, without the drain of paying for Trevor's lifestyle. The business was actually profitable. Who knew that a company could make money when you didn't use it as a personal piggy bank for a wedding that never happened? I sat back in my chair and spun a pen between my fingers. It was strange how quickly the mind adapted to peace. For the first month, I had waited for the other shoe to drop. I had flinched every time the phone rang, expecting a lawsuit from Lucas Barrett or a screaming voicemail from Caroline. But the silence had stretched on, and eventually, my nervous system realized that the war was actually over. Graham was serving his probation quietly. He was working part-time at a hardware store 3 towns over, stocking shelves. It was a humiliation he bore in silence. The house was gone, seized by Barrett to pay the debt. They were living in a small, 2-bedroom rental apartment on the south side of town. Trevor was still gone. Rumor had it he was working as a bartender in St. Louis, trying to reinvent himself where nobody knew his name. And Caroline. I stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the shop floor. I had seen her yesterday. It was the first time our paths had crossed since the day at the mediation center. I had gone downtown to pick up lunch at the sandwich shop on Main Street. It was a beautiful Tuesday, the kind of day where the air feels crisp and full of potential. I was walking out of the shop, a paper bag in my hand, when I saw her. She was walking on the opposite side of the street. She looked smaller than I remembered. She was wearing a coat I recognized, a camel wool coat she had bought 5 years ago, but it looked loose on her now. She wasn't wearing her signature oversized sunglasses. Her hair, usually dyed a fierce, perfect blonde, was showing streaks of gray at the roots. She was carrying a reusable grocery bag, walking with a slight stoop. Her eyes fixed on the pavement. She looked ordinary. That was what struck me the most. Without the borrowed arrogance of the business owner's wife persona, without the frantic energy of trying to maintain a facade of wealth, she was just an aging woman walking home with groceries. Then, she looked up. Her eyes met mine across the 2 lanes of traffic. Time seemed to suspend for a heartbeat. I stood there, holding my sandwich, waiting for the reaction. I waited for the glare. I waited for the look of betrayal. I waited for her to mouth something nasty at me. Or, perhaps, a part of me waited for her to stop, to look at me with regret, to give me that cinematic moment of acknowledgement where the mother finally realizes what she threw away. But she did none of those things. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. A flash of something shame, fear, recognition passed over her face, and then she looked away. She turned her head sharply, staring intently at a display in a shop window. She quickened her pace. Clutching her bag tighter to her chest, she practically ran down the block, turning the corner as fast as she could to escape my line of sight. She fled. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching the empty corner where she had vanished. 6 months ago, that reaction would have devastated me. 6 months ago, her refusal to acknowledge me would have felt like a knife in the gut. I would have gone home and cried. I would have analyzed it for hours, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering why I wasn't worth a wave or a nod. But yesterday, standing in the sunshine, I felt nothing. No, that is not accurate. I didn't feel nothing. I felt a profound, quiet release. I realized in that moment that I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her to admit she was wrong. I didn't need her to love me. For 32 years, I had been auditing a class that I was never going to pass. I had been trying to earn a degree in daughter from a university that didn't exist. I had thought that if I just worked harder, if I just paid more bills, if I just fixed more problems, eventually she would hand me the diploma and say, "Good job, Harper. You are enough." But yesterday, watching her scurry away from her own child, I realized that she didn't have the authority to grade me. She was just a broke, frightened woman who had made a series of terrible choices. She wasn't the gatekeeper of my worth. She was just a person I used to know. I took a bite of my sandwich and walked back to my car. I didn't look back at the corner. I didn't feel the need to chase her. I had chosen to love myself instead. And it turned out that was enough. I snapped back to the present, looking down at the shop floor. The responsible child, that was the role they had cast me in. The fixer, the bank, the safety net. I had fired myself from that position, and in doing so, I had hired myself for a much better one, the architect of my own life. I walked out of the office and down the metal stairs, my boots clanging softly against the treads. I walked out onto the floor. The sawdust danced in the shafts of sunlight that poured through the skylights I had finally paid to have cleaned. I walked over to the CNC machine. It was carving a complex filigree pattern into a piece of cherry wood. The noise was loud, aggressive, and industrial. It was the sound of progress. I ran my hand along the cool metal casing of the machine. 2 days. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it had only taken 2 days to change the trajectory of my entire existence. They had changed the locks on a Tuesday night. By Thursday evening, I owned the building. They had tried to take my key, so I took their house. It wasn't vengeance. I truly believe that now. Vengeance implies that you are trying to hurt the other person. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was just taking back what was mine. The pain they felt was simply the side effect of them trying to hold on to something that didn't belong to them anymore. I looked at the keyring hanging on my belt loop. I didn't need to hide them anymore. I didn't need to worry about someone taking them away. "Harper," Sarah called out from the sanding station. "The supplier is here with the maple delivery. Do you want to sign for it?" I turned and smiled. A genuine, unburdened smile. "I'm coming," I said. I walked toward the loading dock, the sun warming my face. I was 32 years old. I was the owner of Lopez Crafted Company. I had a full bank account, a clean conscience, and a future that was wide open. They had told me to see if I could survive. I didn't just survive, I evolved. 2 days after they locked me out, I took it all. And this time, standing here in the light of the empire I built from the ashes of their greed, I knew one thing for certain. It was mine, and it was mine forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Please comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. I really enjoy connecting with you all. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Helena Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.